Good evening, everyone. I hope you are all keeping well. My name is Emmanuel Ngambule. I'm an architect and I'm an associate professor at the Graduate School of Architecture at the University of Johannesburg. And I would like to welcome you to our fifth and last GSA Practice Lecture in 2025. And also announce that we'll be having the GSA Architecture Week taking place towards the end of this month, August, from the 25th to the 29th of August, 2025. Again, to give a background to this practice lecture series, this lecture series, they foreground critical reflections on the modes, methods, and ethos of contemporary architecture and creative practice. The speakers we invite to this lecture series, we usually ask them to articulate the frameworks through which their practice operates, addressing questions of structure, authorship, pedagogy, and most importantly, their process in their own work. So we privilege reflection over just mere representation of their work or their portfolio. We encourage a deeper consideration of the conditions and challenges and ambitions that shape architectural and broader cultural production today. So today's practice lecture is by Gregory Katz, who is also a lecturer here at the GSA School of Architecture. And this is the last one, as I said, for the year. And just to introduce Gregory, I will read his bio so that we know who he is. So Gregory Katz is an architect, also a lecturer, as I said. And Gregory Katz Architecture began in a garage and continues to strive on agility, innovation, and a commitment to exceeding client expectations. Founded by Gregory Katz, the practice draws from his rich academic and international background. Katz studied architecture at the University of Cape Town and later at Columbia University in New York. His professional journey includes co-founding Omni-Zygo in New York. It is the global exposure that has shaped his distinctive approach to architecture, blending his rigorous design thinking process with creative exploration. The firm operates across a wide spectrum of projects, from private home renovations to bespoke residence for high-end clients, institutional and commercial facilities, large-scale and high-density residential developments. But regardless of scale or budget, the studio consistently challenges conventional architectural norms. Each project becomes a platform to test innovative spatial strategies and inventive uses of material. Budget, time, and spatial constraints are not seen as barriers by this practice, but rather as opportunities to find surprising and unconventional solutions. So at the heart of Gregory Katz Architecture is a belief that architects must actively shape the future of how we build buildings. This belief also drives Katz's involvement in architectural education at the GSA, where he teaches and mentors students to stretch their ideas beyond immediate practicality. Research and experiment are key to his practice, both in his teaching practice and his practice work. Projects are pushed to the edge of feasibility, encouraging new thinking about construction, materials, and the future of architectural space. In every context, the practice remains rooted in the values that marked its early days, which is resourcefulness, adaptability, and unwavering drive to elevate the built environment. From humble beginnings to complex developments, Gregory Katz Architecture continues to offer a fresh perspective and boundary-pushing designs. So today, before I hand over to Greg, I'm just going to go through the house rules. I will please ask all of you to make sure your mics and videos are turned off during the presentation. And then please note, after the presentation, you'll be given an opportunity to ask questions and make comments. I do encourage you to raise up your hands and switch on your mics at that time, and switch on your video if you're also comfortable. Would really enjoy that interaction with you. But if you are not bold enough to do that, you're still welcome to drop a question or a comment on the chat box. Also know that this talk is, you can claim for a CPD certificate for attending this, or being in attendance to this lecture. So we will make the link to the form available after the presentation. So please keep watch on the chat box as we proceed this evening. And yeah, at this time, I will hand over to you, Greg.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to the GSA for offering this platform to talk about practice. It's just so interesting and valuable to see how others practice. I'm no expert on Japanese culture, but I came across a couple of Japanese concepts that really resonated with me in thinking about my practice. The first is shoshin. You'll excuse my poor pronunciation. Shoshin means to approach things with a beginner mindset. This word practice, it seems like the perfect word for what we do as architects. After 30 years of practice, I still feel I'm a novice. I'm still learning new things on every project. I'm practicing. Then Kaizen, which means focusing on small improvements every day, trying to become incrementally a little bit better every day. Making architecture is so very labor and resource intensive. It's permanent. The stakes are high. And yet, to make breakthroughs and advancements, architects need to be taking risks and experimenting. Experimentation and pushing boundaries is the cornerstone of my practice. Sometimes in retrospect, I'm even a bit shocked at the risks we're taking in the name of innovation. Making architecture can be tough. It's stressful, and I love it. The third concept is wabi-sabi, which means that instead of perfection, we should be finding beauty in imperfection. So much of the story that we tell ourselves and we present to the world on social media or in the glossy journals is of architecture as this finished, packaged product. But that's not where innovation lies. It's nice for your portfolio or your Insta feed, but the real coalface experimentation is a lot messier than that. We rarely get to see or hear about the risks that are taken, the complicated conversations of clients and the sleepless nights, the circuitous process that's behind that product. But that's often where the learnings are. I was digging around in the archives for images for this talk, and I came across this one from a long time ago. It still gives me the hives just to see it. You'll notice the aluminium lying around on a site that's not quite ready for it because, you know, subbies, and they're always pushing, thinking about their cash flows, warning of price increases, pushing for clients to place their orders before it's the right time. The image speaks about the naivete or even the hubris of starting out in this field. But this is the thing about the beginner mindset. It's about accepting the limits of one's knowledge and experience, because the more you know, the more you realize how little you know. I made this infographic a while back as a snapshot of projects and workflows in the office. It shows the sequence in which projects arrived in the office. The larger fonts are for bigger projects, and time is on the x-axis. The darker text shows projects with the greatest learnings, and the blue box is for projects that were in progress at the time. The gray box at the top has projects that never happened. Our hit rate was around 50%. I think it's still probably around there today. You can read the various financial downturns in there. For a talk about practice, this is a fitting place to begin. With the studio interior, the physical space that houses my practice. It's where I am right now, and it's where you'll find me most days if I'm not on site or doing kids' lifts or teaching. From this space, I run my small practice. We generally hire at least 2 or 3 permanent staff, and depending on the workflows, we may pull in additional students. On occasion, we've had up to 10. Keeping the practice small and agile has been key to its survival, I believe, particularly during the leaner periods, and boy, have we had a few of those. 2008, the post-COVID years, the pre-election years. Right now, we're experiencing a bit of an uptick, and that is welcome. Here's an exterior view of the studio. Although this was a small and very personal project, it says much about how I experienced my practice. And I experienced practice as a series of incremental learnings. The studio shares the site with our family home and a triangular swimming pool. And it was a self-build project, meaning that there was no main contractor, and I personally managed all the subbies. Having purchased a vacant piece of ground, I wanted a quick method of erecting the studio, and then to move into the office on site where I would manage the daily operations of the practice and, supervise the building of the home from there. The raft foundations were set out and trenched and poured for both the home and the studio concurrently. I keep this picture on file as a handy reminder of the essential violence of making architecture. The studio structure is framed in light steel, chosen for its speed and ease of erection. I expected to take delivery of large panels, but when it arrived on site, we received bundles of hundreds of individual lengths and screws and a set of assembly instructions. And it took myself and 3 carpenters a couple of days of head scratching to work out what to do with all these pieces. But we managed to erect the entire thing in only a few weeks. And like any good dad, it reminded me of when I am asked to DIY build a toy for the kids, and there's invariably 1 or 2 pieces left over, and you're left scratching your head. The cladding is made from asphalt shingles that function like a taut raincoat. And you'll notice in this image the first floor cantilever landing and the spiral stair, which I bought of Gumtree. Now, while it seemed at the time logical to cantilever the landing, we had endless problems of water ingress where the steel projects beyond the building envelope. Someone compared it to tucking your raincoat into your undies, which is never a good idea. Living in your own creation is an education. You get to experience what works and what doesn't. There's a special kind of pain in being confronted by your blind spots every day. We fixed this one by removing the steel cantilever and building a freestanding tower as a landing. And while we were at it, we added a straight stair as some of my elderly clients struggled with the spiral. This project was a study in economical design, with the dimensions worked out precisely with the brick module. No bricks were cut. One seldom sees stock brick built to a face brick standard like this, nicely jointed, etc. For the treads and risers, we used 1.2 meter concrete pavers. You can see them in the bottom right of this image. And again, we went for zero wastage philosophy and cut those 1.2 meter pavers into the 600 modules for the stairs and risers. And then the disparity between the brick module resulting in the 680 width, sorry, this is a bit technical, I realize, and the 600 paver module left the perfect surplus space to mount the balustrade. There are redemption stories with the main dwelling here too. Since we wanted to avoid the expense of using a main contractor, we broke the job up into discrete subcontracts, and it made sense to separate out the structure as a concrete frame with large span mini coffer slabs. We used these special shaped clay bricks as infill. I was at the Cara Brick Yard one day and I saw them lying there. I think they'd been an overrun from a very old project and nobody was using them, and I offered to take it off their hands for a nominal fee. And then, you know, we experimented with creating different patterns you'll see on the right, just by the orientation of those bricks. And, you know, we got this kind of subtle varying striation on the facade. And it reminds me of an Agnes Martin painting. These are the interiors. We used vinyl on the floors. It's not often when working with clients that one gets to experiment as much as we did on this project. A big part of our job as architects is having the ability to pivot in response to unforeseen inaccuracies in construction. Off-shutter concrete is one of the hardest things to get right. We are a nation of bricklayers, not carpenters, unfortunately. So when the stairs were stripped and the levels were vastly inconsistent, which is putting it kindly, it was decided to chop the surface to rectify things. And I think that the results were quite successful. The staircase is a pleasure to walk up and down, particularly barefoot. One feels like one's walking on rock. This gives you a sense of the material palette. You know, living in the space really reveals itself over time. And one notices the interesting silhouettes of the bricks at night, and the shadows cast by the yellow aluminium panes during the day, and kind of mirroring the diagonal stripes of the floor. We chose to put the door handles in the middle of the cupboard doors instead of the traditional, you know, off-centered position. And that was in an attempt to kind of disguise the handles. It was very successful, except one never knows which way the doors are going to open. There were also a lot of games being played with the heights of windows. We felt like in the more private parts of the home upstairs that we wanted these really high window sills. And so the sills are at about 1.4 meters, and that gives us a lot of privacy. But if you want to see what's happening down in the garden, one does need to get on a little plinth in the corner of the room. And it does reveal our wonderful Johannesburg skies daily. You know, the house continues to be a work in progress, and we recently decided to remove this column on the patio, on the covered patio. So I chatted to our engineer, and we retrofitted this long steel rebar, you know, mounting it to the beam of the roof, and just effectively suspending the concrete slab. And then we heated it up and covered it with a plate and welded the plate to the rebar. And then the rebar cooled down and shrunk, and that kind of put everything nicely in tension. And then we demolished that column. And we're now able to enjoy that patio without that obstruction. But this kind of post-occupancy casual. I can hear myself echoing. Somebody's got their mic on. Sorry. Okay, good. Thank you. That helps. So this kind of post-occupancy casual retroactive fine-tuning, it's available when one is both architect and client. But that's unusual. You know, we generally don't have this kind of autonomy or agency to assess and rectify things. One of the great skills needed in practice is navigating the highly personal relationship with a client, negotiating fees, selling your vision, managing their budget and their expectations, managing their relationship with contractors and suppliers. It can be tough. Besides what we expect from our job, one is also a therapist, an advocate, a couples counselor, a financial manager, negotiator, interlocutor, educator, salesman, sounding board, all rolled into one. One of the things that I learned early on was to be flexible and innovative with the methods of charging clients with remuneration. You know, clients are always surprised by architects' fees. It's almost a kind of trope. For this project, which was a small housing development, we agreed that I would charge a minimal monthly retainer and that in exchange for fees, or the balance of the fees, I would be allowed to buy one of the 3 units for the cost of the build. And that served both the client and me because I was super invested in managing the budget and the quality of the build. This strategy, so some other things just to note on this project. I included this image. It's got the engineer and the contractor. I was incredibly lucky early on to make contact with very good contractors and very reliable professionals and consultants to help me. And it's such a key part of practicing to kind of identify and find and forge those relationships. I, would never have known that to make perfect concrete, you needed perfect shutters. And we custom made these shutters for this project. And because we were doing 3 of the same building, there were economies of scale to kind of warrant the production of such perfect shutters. The drawings that were needed to make this building were incredibly detailed upfront because there's no chasing of the reticulation after the fact. All of that needs to happen in the drawing so that you can reticulate before the walls are cast. And it was a successful early project. But this strategy of trading off fees for a stake in the development is not always a slam dunk. For this medium density housing project, I negotiated a stake in the development profits in lieu of fees. And one thing that we seldom appreciate as architects is the pressure of time on capital. It had always seemed to me a bit perverse, the pressure cooker tempo of the developer mindset, wanting the project designed and delivered at breakneck speed. But as I found out on this project, once the cash starts flowing, the interest bill starts ticking, and it starts eating into the profits and the profitability of the development. And that's where the bureaucratic inefficiencies of our city become a complete liability and a barrier to investment. This, for those of you who don't know, is what a unicorn looks like. For over 2 years, we were struggling to get what they call a Regulation 38 clearance certificate from the council for this development. And my balls were in a vice for almost 2 years. The project, because of those delays, wasn't nearly as profitable as it should have been or could have been. And, I learned much about the financial risks and stresses of development. And, ultimately this served me because it helped me to build a greater empathy and understanding for the developer client. And that served me well. This is an image that we made for a project for a commercial client, and they were this kind of like very down-to-earth, straight shooter commercial client who were extremely suspicious of architects who they thought were out to kind of waste their money on decorative flourishes. And we had this idea that we would kind of make this building out of face brick, which they bought into because they're a scrap metal dealer, like a metal salvage business. And this was their head office, and it's a very dusty environment. And they felt that, you know, face brick would be a good solution because it would be beneficial from a maintenance point of view. And we made this drawing, which is an elevation, and it's an unfolded elevation. And we did the drawing so that we could show the client that if we kind of mixed up the bricks and we could measure the exact quantity of the bricks, that we could calibrate the quantities so that there was no wastage, and that the delivery pallets would be identical to if we had ordered a single type of brick for this project. So this drawing is kind of a good sample of what kinds of drawings is useful sometimes to show clients. One shouldn't think that every client needs to see a high-end render of the building. You know, sometimes it's beneficial to kind of withhold some of that information. And the client was kind of surprised and pleasantly surprised as they watched these kind of face brick patterns emerging on the facade during the build. The next project was for another developer client, and it was one of the first new build projects in the inner city for many decades at the time. And it was a full city block around Marshall Street and Main Street and Nugget Street and Fox Street in the CBD. And here we made this drawing to explore with the client one of the kind of key spatial innovations of this project, which was to do with the circulation routes in the center around the courtyard of the building. And we felt that, you know, instead of having your typical 1.5 meter circulation, that there would be a tremendous benefit for expanding those spaces, making them more generous and wider, and allowing them to kind of double up as communal space, as social space for the building. And so we made these drawings because developers are very interested in like a kind of cost-benefit analysis. And we had originally planned these little balconies around the perimeter. So we took the exact GLA of the balconies and then we kind of shifted them to the interior courtyard, and we consolidated them into these kind of outgrowths of the corridors. And we were able to prove to the developer that without spending any more money, we would kind of add value to the building. And then we had this idea that instead of laundry happening, I don't know, off-site or in the basement or somewhere else, that we would incorporate laundry into the corners of the chamfered corners of those walkways, and that people would kind of hang their laundry. We had this idea that the smells of clean laundry would kind of be wafting through the courtyard. Ultimately, that part of our vision wasn't realized, but there are sinks in the laundry to do the laundry, but the laundry lines are on the roof. But you can see how people in this building really enjoy that extra space that we made for them. And another kind of great outcome of making a courtyard in this building was that we didn't need to disrupt any of the sidewalks around the building while we were building it. All the construction happened from the center outwards. We also conducted several experiments with the brickwork. It's a low-cost project, extremely tight budget, so we had to be innovative with kind of very basic materials, and we went for this kind of pixelated brickwork because we had a concrete frame to do all the heavy lifting, and the brickwork was all infill. And we made these giant kind of shwe patterns on the facade. It's quite an iconic building. A lot of people know it in that part of the CBD. It's a bit of a landmark. kind of part of this talk has to do with relationships and relationships with clients and spotting opportunities. For the same client as that previous project, we then moved on to this project in the CBD on the other side of town, Marshalltown side, on Anderson Street. And this is an adaptive reuse. There was this building with this wonderful name called Totalizator House, modernist building, office building, which we converted into housing. And the normal approach to a project like this would have been to kind of obliterate those wonderful ribbon windows, to deal with the fire codes. You know, one needs that 1 meter fire break between units. But here we went for a slightly different approach. We got permission to use Georgian wire glass between the units at these 45-degree angles, pushing the windows, the ribbon window, right to the edge of the reveal on the exterior, and having those Georgian wire glass kind of chamfer back to the walls that divide the units. And Mies van der Rohe would be having a fit with those curtains in the windows, right? But the beauty of this project is really appreciated from the interior, because we got these very kind of subtle bay window effects inside those units. But the real reason I'm showing you this project is you'll notice that just next to that building, between the Reef Hotel and Totalizator House, there's a small parking garage. And I spotted that parking garage while we were doing the refurb to Totalizator House. And in this part of town, there's a real surplus of parking. Standard Bank is across the road, and there's a lot of parkades around. And that parking garage was pretty empty most of the time. So I made a proposal to the developer, and I said, let's do a little feasibility study, and let's check out what we can do with that parking garage. So we had a look at converting it to housing. It's not something you see very often. Parking garages have these very deep floor plates, and they don't, I don't know, spring to mind when one thinks resi. But we did a quick study, and the numbers worked. And the developer bought this building, and we created a project out of nothing for ourselves. So the reason I'm telling you this is because I feel like architects need to learn to be more proactive. Here's the finished product. Also very low cost, very budget conscious client. And, you know, to make the handrails, we used polycarb, and the polycarb kind of mirrors this light well that we made in the center of the project. And again, thinking around community and the idea of a social condenser in the middle of the building, we made this lovely social space. And so the project was mainly about like demolition. You know, there was a lot of kind of taking out of existing slabs and making the building work for us. Here we are choosing paint colors for the exterior. The client was open to making a kind of, blacklight, artificially lit garden in the base, in the entrance foyer, with some neon signage. And, you know, we have a lot of fun with these projects because the budgets are tight, and that means that there's actually more room to experiment and be innovative. You know, this is a project that we did for another prospective developer in Khayelitsha, and any of my students listening to this right now will recognize this typology. These are backyard dwellings for developers, like landowners in townships. And what we wanted to do here was to think through how we could kind of capitalize on local knowledge and local skills and local trade and mass produce something kind of but tall in these very confined environments where you can't get a concrete mixer in. So we came up with this concept to use brick vaults, and we could kind of like pack sand, soil on top of the vaults. And then instead of a concrete slab, we would use pavers and then carry on with our the next kind of level. And the key innovation here was working out how we were going to kind of tie and spring these vaults and make a kind of formwork for the vaults that was kind of easy to move around, user-friendly, not too expensive. And we actually made a single prototype, and it was well received, but to date, we have not kind of realized the full project. So if there are any interested developers / investors out there who want to run with this, just be in touch with me. And, you know, one shouldn't think that all our projects are kind of these glamorous events. We do a lot of work for developers these days. Like really 80% of the work on the boards is converting these office parks into housing, into resi. A lot of vacant office space these days. If you walk into our office on any given day, you may find somebody kind of working on a feasibility or layouts. This is actually a storage facility that, you know, we're converting an office into storage, office building into storage. Quite sad, but true. This is what a feasibility looks like. We're testing sizes of units. This is often what creativity looks like in our office, where we're looking at spreadsheets. Yeah, I don't want to depress you too much. Some of our projects are quite small. We work on residential projects for kind of these little bespoke dwellings for clients. This is a house that looks like it's made of brick, but it's actually made from clay pavers. And we had a lot of fun with this project, and the clients are still one of my excellent friends. Our excellent friends, here we are hanging out in their space post-build. And the good thing with having great relationships with clients is that they come back to you. So, you know, during COVID, they needed a little workspace from home, and we made this little Japanesey pavilion for them, and we made some concrete sculptures in their garden. This project is a house. It's for that client that I showed you, that that metals dealer. We made their office building, the one with the diagonal brickwork. And this is a project in one of these developments where you know, there's a whole bunch of rules, very strict rules around how things should look. And they wanted a mix of brickwork. It shouldn't just be one kind of homogeneous looking thing. We needed to have at least, I think, 40% or 30% brickwork. We, however, wanted this thing to be this pristine, very clean white box. So we hid all the brickwork around the back. And here you can see it. It's at the plinth level and around the back. So everything you see from the street is white. And of course, we got into a lot of trouble for this. You know, neighbors were objecting, and we had to go and sit in front of the committee and explain how we'd found this loophole in their design guidelines. And another learning from this project is that it takes a tremendous amount of thinking to make something disappear, to make something invisible. That, you know, to achieve the kind of very minimalist aesthetic where there are no skirtings and no cornices and everything's kind of flush and meets at very kind of pristine angles, is tricky. And this is what it looks like during construction. There's a reveal for a window, and here's the concealed gutter. I'll never make another gutter like this again. It gave me endless sleepless nights. But there you can see the continuous folded plate that takes the water from the gutter to the edge of the building. This is another kind of playful project where we were approached by a couple who wanted something novel. So we made 4 little cardboard models that were quite banal, and we sent them away with these little boxes, these little rectangles, and asked them to choose one. And they came back to us and were umming and ahhing. And then we said, we actually have this other project on the computer, which we'd like to show you, another kind of proposal. And then we showed them this, and well, they were kind of blown away, because It's very, very unusual. But the lesson there is, you know, always give clients something to choose from. Never show them your desired outcome first. It's often better to withhold it. There's a triangle, there's a kind of hexagonal living space, there's a lounge which is round, there's a rectangular dining room, there's a square office, little standalone office pod, an elliptical pool. We call it the Great Primary Shapes House. The rooftops are all habitable. Not everything went smoothly on this project. We had a little mishap here with the triangular entranceway, with this the misalignment of that wall on the right. I arrived on site. It was meant to be, you know, tie in with the corner of that hexagon, and it didn't, because they'd founded the triangle a little bit deeper than we expected, and they'd started it at the same width that we showed, and you know, not everything was as precise as we'd liked. And the image on the right shows what a good contractor does in that circumstance, and that's to demolish and start again. There was some perforated brick work here that the engineer, I'm sure gave the engineer some grey hairs, but it is still standing. And we elected not to put the fins on this glass. This massive piece of glass that's just kind of butt joined. The pink flooring took ages to arrive. It was also like just post-COVID, and the shipping lanes were not quite functional yet. And it was a wonderful choice, but delayed the project a lot. The stormwater didn't drain properly from this cast slab here in you know, between the two structures. Not everything goes smoothly all the time on these builds, and that's what I was saying in the beginning, that you kind of expect that everything's just smooth sailing when you see people's portfolios or their websites, but you don't get to see all this stuff. This is quite a shocking experience, and this window fell out. I think I've kind of said enough. You know, there are some other things to show you. This is a bunch of, this is all the built work that we've made over the years. In elevation, I just made these elevations quite recently. And this is all the built work. I think it's good to do this in retrospect, where you kind of just comparing, you know, all the different projects that you've had in a drawn format, and kind of taking stock of your journey. I was going to give a bit of a spiel about my origin story now, but I'm not going to get into it, because I want to leave some time for some questions. And you all can just put your hands up, please, if you would. I'll stop sharing, and we can take some questions.
Great, that was amazing. I'll actually want to get into that background story. So if you could just indulge us a bit more, and just cover that, just expand on that. Then I'll just ask everyone with questions to please, you can use the chat to share your questions. I think we're more curious about that background story. What makes Greg tick? What makes it produce this kind of work? So please do share a bit more about that.
Okay. So as Emmanuel said in the intro, I went to Columbia University, and at the time Bernard Tschumi was the dean, and Kenneth Frampton was kind of like head of the history department, and there were a bunch of rock stars there at the time. There's Greg Lynn, Hani Rashid. A lot of them have fallen away into obscurity now, you know, which is actually also an interesting lesson for me. When you can be an important person in your time, and people forget about you. So I included this image of Tschumi's work. This was all the rage when I was at the university there. Silicon Graphics computers. Many of you won't know this, but there was Apple and Silicon Graphics were the two like kind of big hardware manufacturers at the time, and Silicon Graphics was the platform that most of the Hollywood, kind of early innovative Hollywood films were made with, like any CGI. And they donated a bunch of these to Columbia at the time. And so we had access to very early parametric facilities. But I was actually always much more interested in the streets of New York and having access to these wonderful places where you could kind of get anything. You could get anything from circuit boards to pieces of foam rubber to lucite and all sorts of perspex and plastic. And me and my kind of mates at the time were living downtown. We built these incredible materials collections. I've spent time working in small practices and larger practices. This was a guy, Zvi Hecker. We built this nursery school in Berlin. And I spent time working in Studio Daniel Libeskind in Los Angeles when he was starting out there and making all these physical models for his competition entries. And then 9/11 happened, and I was kind of in South America on a bit of a sabbatical. All my stuff was in New York in my apartment, and it all just disappeared into the ether. The airports were closed. It was very uncertain times. We didn't know whether World War III was going to happen. And I came back to Josie, and I was young and had a lot of energy, and I felt a lot to offer. And I got a job with Urban Solutions and OMM Design Workshop, who had won the competition for the courts. And I worked on this project on the Constitutional Court precinct. I was responsible for a lot of the street furniture that you still see in that precinct. These lights, the street poles, were actually something that I developed with Beaker, the lamp pole manufacturer. And I've always had this interest in prototyping and manufacturing ever since the days of Columbia, because there was just a spirit of making at Columbia at the time. Like there was this well-equipped workshop, and students were busy making lots of physical models and pouring resin and embedding things and cutting things. And so just even to this day in my backyard, we're making bits of furniture and checking how thin we can pour concrete. And this is an adjustable table and a very lightweight table and some lights, and we made our braai out of rammed earth. So yeah, there's a lot of tinkering and experimenting at the scale of kind of furniture happening in the practice as well. And then I'm also teaching, obviously. But that's my backstory, Emmanuel.
I think that was really amazing. Thank you so much, Greg. Just to expose us to your creative backyard. that we really appreciate that. And maybe just to prompt you on that before I read some comments on the chat and take some questions from those that are online. Just maybe a bit back. I mean, I know you've shared about your background, where you studied, and the practice you've worked for. Is there anything else maybe in your journey that would have inspired this kind of approach? I mean, I really appreciate this kind of intimate knowledge about materials and the age to be creative. I mean, I find that your work seems to allow the constraints of available materials, available time, as you said, and available budget as kind of as a springboard for you to be so creative about materials and experimenting. As you showed up in some of your projects, that experimenting has consequences, because if you don't do a standard details, then the window might fall and someone could almost get hurt, and kind of put yourself at the edge and just expose yourself in that extent. But what is it that really inspired this? Is it something that might have happened before your exposure to architecture education and the practices that you've worked for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, how far back should we go? I don't know.
As far as you can.
I think that yeah, there are a number of things. I'm actually quite a shy person, so I spent a lot of time in my youth on my own and just drawing and like making forts for myself out of whatever I found lying around at home. So, I had very supportive kind of parents who kind of nurtured that spirit in me. Thanks, Mom and Dad, if you're listening. And I had good kind of teachers and a wonderful, I don't know, just supportive environment growing up. So I think that does contribute to one's confidence in oneself and to experiment and try things and try and convince other people to try things. Yeah. When I was at varsity, I also kind of worked a lot. I must say that it is something that I try and foster in my own practice, pulling in students to come and work here in the office, because I think there's nothing like being around other people doing this very hard thing that we do, and kind of witnessing it at a very early age. There's no substitute for that. So if students can kind of get their foot in the door anywhere, just take that opportunity. Even when I was at UCT for my undergrad during vacations, I was going back in those days, there was somebody there to like scratch the Mylar drawings when the draftsman needed to make a correction. I was that guy with the razor blade, like literally just scratching off the ink off the drawings. But, even the menial work, you're just in that environment and you learn so much. So I think that's a bit of advice I can give to the young people out there.
Right, that's a great answer. I mean, having been to your studio and seeing how you also engage with the artisans, and I think you probably see yourself as an artisan too. So I think your engagement with them, coming, when you come to go to site, either be the architect and be imposing on the people that make your vision come alive. But I kind of saw that mutual respect that you exhibit when you work on site. So maybe that's something that adds into that. So but
Emmanuel, you're so right. I mean, I've got like, I wish I had the right words for this, but when I am on site and I see people throwing a brick and catching a brick up 2 stories, or the kind of precision and innovation around how to make things square, it's, there's so much embedded intelligence in people's hands, so much knowledge that's on site. And that is also, a student came to me recently, they said they can't get a job in an architecture firm. And I said, go find a job on site. You can read a plan, you will learn so much just being on site and watching how buildings are put together. So you're 100% right. I've got a hashtag, it's called Workers Got Skills.
Great advice for students. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go to the chats. There's a couple of comments here, quite a lot of comments there. I'll start off with Aziba. Here's kind of a tough question for you. Aziba says, thank you sincerely for sharing your knowledge with us. Your presentation was both informative and engaging. There's, however, one detail I would like to gently raise. While I recognize the innovative spirit behind placing cupboard handles at the center of the doors, I believe this approach may not be practical in everyday use. From a physics standpoint of view, it contradicts the principle of lever arm, which supports positioning handles off-center to reduce the effort required when opening or closing a door. I share this observation with appreciation for your creativity and in the spirit of constructive dialogue. Thank you for your understanding. Do you want to respond to that?
Yes. I would only ever do it on my own cupboards. I only ever want myself to go through the extra effort of opening a cupboard with the handle in the center. And you're quite right, it is a bit more difficult. But for me, the pleasure of having that kind of repeated symmetrical stud in the middle of that panel makes up for the extra effort on my fingers.
Great answer. Great answer. And then I'll move on to the next one. This is Vivian. Vivian just makes a comment and says, super creativity, thanks. Then the next one is Yami. It's high grade, always amazing to see your work and hear about your journey as a special practitioner. I'm curious to know how you continue to grow your construction knowledge. Over to you.
Thanks, Damikani. I assume that's you. Yami, you know, like I said in the beginning, the more you know, the more you realize how little you know. And I find that rings so true daily. We're now at the GSA kind of with the students exploring timber construction. And it's something that I know a little bit about because, you know, I was educated in the States, so I have limited knowledge based on what I learned there at the time. It was kind of like a very prevalent construction technology, but there's a lot to learn and you'll never know it all. So the important thing is just to stay curious and keep your mind open and keep experimenting and research. That's the way to learn.
Great. Then Lon Paulson says, thank you, Greg. Very inspiring, and I think much of the Velofi approach relates to getting one's hands dirty and understanding through touch and feel the possibilities of limitations of materials. I guess that's a comment. Then I'll move to the next one. Clara says, material knowledge is essential to architecture like a tailor of fabric. We don't know materials and experiment, we are dead weight. So I guess that's also so rather a question, a comment.
If that is Clara Cruz, then thanks for tuning in all the way from where you are.
Then I'll go to Mtolisi, also has made a comment. It says, hi grade, always enjoy seeing your work. Thanks for the lovely presentation. I appreciate how you emphasize the craft of architecture as a tactile and iterative process. One of my favorite features of your own house is the cozy nooks under and next to the stairs, as well as the unique spaces that emerge during the making process, which you never mention. Could you share some insights on how you work through a project in your practice? Perhaps a little more on the iterative process, but also humor accidents in the creative process and how architecture emerges. I think that's a great question.
Such a nice question. Thanks, Msolisi. So it's very, very difficult to define, but I don't think that there's any kind of magic ingredient that I have that we as architects, and I'm speaking to an audience of architects here, don't already know that the project needs to emerge in response to various factors, various constraints. And the more constraints we have, the better the product and the kind of more, and the easier the process. So we take the client's brief and we visit the site and we make sketches. I work a lot. I've got this roll of bump here. It's actually impossible to find the stuff anymore. I have to order it on Temu, but you know, like a roll of tracing paper over a printed A3 drawing and some pencil crayons. And that's how you iterate. That's how you kind of sketch through and think through a design, always to scale, always on a printed copy off the computer. So we're never kind of like working in dreamland. Like there's always kind of a response to real dimensions. And then if we have time and if we have budget, we will kind of make some physical models. I used to do that a lot more. These days, a lot less. The projects have grown quite large, and it's not so revealing anymore when you make a physical model. But the smaller projects, I found to make like a 1:50 physical cardboard model was very helpful. And yeah, so it's just that same iterative process that we all learn at school. You know, and I'm trying to teach our students now that you need to sketch and develop the project from concept, with a strong concept, to the final product. I'm busy with a project now where I'm designing a more public building for a committee. And it's quite fraught because the brief is coming through in dribs and drabs, and it's not so defined, and there's a lot of opinions and a lot of decision makers. And I find that kind of having a very clear-sighted client, even if you're not on the same page, but you have a rapport with, that helps a lot. Like you actually want to choose your clients based on who you kind of have a good rapport with, not necessarily agree on everything with, or even have the same vision for the project with, because that kind of tension in a project can often yield like unexpectedly good results. You know, having that a bit of resistance from a client. But yeah, all those things, the client, the site, the concept, and the work that goes into it, into developing the project, those are the ingredients for making architecture.
Fantastic. Just to announce again, on the chat, we have the form for you to complete for your CPD, but I'm going to take some few more questions, then we're going to wrap it up. I will read through Mark. I don't know which Mark is this one, but Mark has made a comment, a question rather, and says, well done, Greg. Always a pleasure to not only see the work, but importantly to hear you articulate it. I have a question. What are your future plans or aspirations for your practice?
It's the Mark you know, by the way.
Nice to see you. Nice to hear.
Mark.
Wonderful to see you, Mark.
It's love.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question. Thank you. It's when I showed that little infographic at the beginning, it was that was done like in maybe 2017, 2018. And at that point, I really thought, I'm going to grow this practice. It's a small practice, but it's got bigger and more frequent jobs, and I'm working for these developers, and how am I going to like expand the practice? And it's actually quite a tricky thing. There's a whole kind of consultant subset. It's called a scale jockey, and they like come in and show you how to kind of manage that expansion, because you know you always want to kind of manage your overheads, and you don't want to get too big too fast, and you don't want to take jobs that are too big for you because you can't manage them. So growing a practice is quite a tricky thing. But over the years, I think I've kind of settled into this rhythm of working in this way where workflows are very contingent on the environment and the kind of, I don't know, political occurrences in a place, in the financial markets, and I actually think there's a benefit in having this kind of very agile, smaller practice that we can expand and contract as needs be. And so I'm very kind of comfortable with the way things are, and that's not to say that I wouldn't welcome bigger work or kind of more aspirational work, but right now the practice serves me, and I have a great work-life balance, and I love teaching in conjunction with all of that. So things are working, and I just hope to learn more and do more and have the kind of more exciting projects that we've always had.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Mark, do you want to
Sending love, Mark.
Want to say more?
I think he didn't hear you.
Okay, so okay, I'm just going to read. I want to see which questions are here. And by the way, thank you everyone for the questions and the comments. I will take, I think we can take one more, then we can wrap up the session. I'm going to choose one. Forgive me if I haven't chosen your question. It's just perfect time. So I'm going to choose him to do this comment here or question here. It says, good presentation in terms of understanding domesticity and daily rituals from Unit 17 related to Unit 17. Could you explain why we as space planners in SA keep designing kitchen spaces to house laundry equipment like washing machines and dryers, when almost all of us keep our laundry in the bathroom? Isn't that a counterintuitive approach?
Daryl, thanks for the question. I think that it's actually a very important question, this, because it has to do with the traditional uses of space and conventions of space that need to be challenged. And in a lot of the projects that I'm doing now, we are working with incredibly tight spaces in these affordable housing projects that are kind of required to hold a whole person's life. And you'd be very surprised at the kind of types of furniture even that people choose for those tiny spaces. These kind of huge sofas and massive TV screens. And I think as architects, we really need to re-engage with the realities of domesticity, of how people inhabit their domestic spaces, and test and probe those and interrogate those, and ultimately reinterpret how we make those spaces, even what we call those spaces. So thanks for the question, it's welcome, and we'll discuss more on Thursday when I see you.
So that's a studio session here, but thank you so much, Matt. Thanks so much, Greg. And thanks for, I'm still thinking about the surprise of having Matt to join us from far away. And thank you for everyone who's posted questions, made a very great conversation, and really engaged with the work of Greg. Amazing work. Thank you so much, Greg. I really appreciate your presentation and really much inspired by the creativity and pushing the boundaries the way you do. So well done, well done.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I would be remiss if I didn't thank you and thank the ops team. Thank you, Boitumelo. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, all of you, for hosting, and thanks to Mark for dreaming up this wonderful platform for all of us. Good night.
Great, thanks. So just a few things before we wrap up. I would like to again announce that the link to complete your attendance, it's available on the chat, so you can click on that, complete your information so that you can get your CPD certificate. And also to remind you again that on the 24th of August to the 29th of August, we'll be having the GSA Architecture Week. Would like you to attend to come and see the work of our students there. We'll also be having, in the same week, we'll be having 2 face-to-face lectures, guest lectures there by Nick Axel and also by Nzina Boop. So we look forward to seeing you there. But thank you so much and have a great evening. Bye to all of you.